this the correct tool and dice heat treatment affect your work? Are you dealing with cold work and hot work tools still? Good morning, today from Siko Warwick workshop in Poland. My name is Łukasz Fiałkowski and I have the opportunity to talk to Carlos Humberto Sartori from Vilares, Brazil, who will be disclose to me some important points to pay attention to during heat treatment. Heat treatment is one of the middle steps in the production of parts. What happens before affects the heat treatment. The heat treatment itself affects the properties of the parts and the next stage of their production. Incorrect communication between final user and the heat treater may cause poor tool's performance. Carlos, how do you see communication issue in the heat treatment? And by the way, before you start, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi Lucas, thank you so much for your invitation. Thanks for having me here to talk a little bit about heat treatment. Well, let me introduce myself. My name is Carlos Sartori. I'm a specialist engineer at Vilares Metals, Brazil. I am responsible for the technical assistance and the application engineering for all the tool steels, special alloys, stainless steel, and heat treatment with our customers. Vilares Metals here in Brazil has 3 heat treatment centers located in the most industrial areas as São Paulo, Santa Catarina, and Rio Grande do Sul. Well, my friend, your first question is related to communication. Yes, for sure, communication is so important. We gotta have, I like to say, an intimacy with our customer, especially when you need to know the application of the part. When you know the application, you can customize the cycle for better properties. Sometimes you receive, I wouldn't say sometimes, most of the times you just receive hardness as a specification. And hardness is something I normally say that it's very easy to get the hardness. You can sometimes perform a poorly performed heat treatment and you can get the hardness. So hardness is not everything. We have to consider also other properties such as toughness, corrosion resistance, and you can customize the cycle by knowing the application. I have a good example related to high-speed steel. I remember a customer that used to send a high-speed steel for a heat treater, and he was just asking for hardness. And the heat treater performed, of course, a good heat treatment using high austenitizing temperature like 1200. And okay, it was a well-performed heat treatment, but that part was not for cutting application. It was a cold work application using a high-speed steel. So the performance of the part was not the best that we should have. And we decided to bring those parts to our heat treatment shop and perform a heat treatment based on cold work application using lower austenitizing temperature. And I mean, the performance was great. The chipping, the cracking was gone and the part was performing very well. So this always comes with communication. And hardness also can bring you some good productivity in heat treatment shops. Sometimes you got from customers many ranges of hardness. Of course, when you open your vacuum furnace after a quenching load, you can have many different temperatures ranges, temperatures for different hardness ranges. And when you got the intimacy to talk to that customer and check the application, you might say, you don't need 54, 56, 56, 58, 58, 60, 60 Rockwell C. Maybe we can check together the application and like do everything with 58, 60 or 56, 58. You just get that by a good communication. What also can come with a good communication? Stock material. You cannot just receive a part and just do the heat treatment without knowing if there is enough stock material for the final machining. Sometimes you have aesthetic requirements, like the parts should be bright of the heat treatment, and maybe you can have a vacuum tempering, so you gotta know it before you start the heat treatment. So that's why I say communication is so important. You can get rid of many troubles just by having a free conversation to your customer and understanding what are the properties he really needs, not only hardness. Hardness is for sure important, but the good performance is much more than hardness. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. We already know how important communication in heat treatment is. It is important to control time, temperature and cooling media for proper processes. Carlos, why are the process parameters not always respected?
It's a good question. I would like to answer your question starting with something I learned with my father. My father always say, don't start fixing something if you don't have the correct tool. I remember as a kid trying to fix my bike with a knife, and then my father used to come with his box of tools and say, hey kid, you cannot use a knife for that. Use this screwdriver, do it properly. It's the same with the heat treatment. If you don't have the proper equipment, if you don't have the proper control, such as calibrated instruments, calibrated thermocouples, you should not be in the heat treatment business. And it's sad to say that some heat treaters try to heat treat tool steels, special alloys or stainless steel out of the specification, maybe because the furnace can reach the temperature, and it's something that we should consider. You gotta comes back with the first question. You gotta have a open communication with the heat treatment, so you will be able to see if the thermal cycle is being performed. Another thing that I always say in terms of heat treatment is the correct control of time, of temperature. For example, when we use a vacuum furnace, we can use like thermocouples in the part, we can use the furnace thermocouple or a dummy block. And I have seen many mistakes by using incorrect dummy blocks for a big part. Sometimes they use the correct thickness of the dummy block, that's the same thickness of the part, but the part is 8 times bigger. You cannot only think about thickness, you need to figure out that this dummy block is 100 kilos and the part is 800 kilos, even if they have the same thickness. So it's another problem that we see with some heat treaters. Also with tempering, sometimes the tempering times are not respected, and we have a poorly tempered material. So, I mean, it's hard to say why the heat treaters don't follow the correct specifications, but most of them is the lack of knowledge how to control it, or maybe it's you don't have the correct equipment. And remember what my father said, don't start if you don't have the proper tool or the proper equipment for that.
The cost and time to produce a hot works die is really huge. The effect that may arise during heat treatment can cost a lot. What is good to pay attention before we start the process?
Heat treaters, they have this important mission. We receive a very complex and expensive tool, and we're going to place it inside of the furnace. We're going to heat it to very high temperatures, and we're going to quench it really fast. I mean, you got to do a very good critical analysis before you start that. Otherwise, we're going to be in trouble. And here in Villares, we're very picky with critical analysis, not only in terms of sharp corners. I mean, remember the first question you asked me regarding communication. We got to have an open communication to our customers to tell them, you cannot send me those sharp corners. You're going to round, you need to round them. You cannot send us all those machining marks. It might crack during quenching. It's also important to know if the parts had a previous heat treatment. Sometimes you got to check the hardness before you do the heat treatment. Sometimes the part is already heat treated. Also, remember that sometimes the customer might ask you something that it's not the best thing for the part. I mean, in Portuguese, and also I guess in English, normalizing. Normalizing is a heat treatment that is, every time we receive a tool with the requirement, please normalize it, we call the customer and say, what do you mean with normalizing? Because normalizing looks like normal. If you do like a heavy machining, and if you do like a welding, you want to bring the part back to normal. So the heat treatment is normalizing. No, maybe the heat treatment is stress relief. And so the critical analysis is important also for that. If you check that the customer is asking you for something that shouldn't be applied, you gotta call them and discuss that. And just to finish, I would like to give you guys a good example in terms of thin walls. The critical analysis should be very picky in terms of thin walls, because thin walls might crack during quenching, especially in big parts. Recently, we received a set of dies for heat treatment according NADCA. And those parts, they looked like a Swiss cheese. So many holes. And of course, we decided to plug the holes with a ceramic fiber so we could simulate the solid. But we decided to call our friends at the R&D department in Villares Metals for a computer simulation. We asked them to help us by simulating the heat treatment using those softwares. And it was incredible because with the simulation, using NADCA specification, the minimum quench rate from NADCA specification, there was more than 100% of cracks on those thin walls. So we came to the customer and say, check the simulation. You see, the thin walls are very tricky. Those thin walls are very, it's a risk for the heat treatment. Do you authorize me to go on with the heat treatment? We did it. There was no crack, but on the simulation, we were very close to 100% of chance of cracking those areas. So, critical analysis is mandatory. It's something that I always tell our team to perform. And it brings back the first question. Critical analysis and communication to the customer, it's a key point to the success on the heat treatment. Thank you so much.
Carlos, thank you for sharing your experience. I think today everyone knows what are the three most important things in the tool and dies heat treatment. And if there is still something unclear, Carlos and me will be very pleased to answer your question. You can find us on the LinkedIn.